Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar entitled Countdown to Compliance, Workplace Violence Prevention Program Essentials for California Employers. This webinar is presented by Ethos Human Capital Solutions and Merhab Robinson and Clarkson Law Corporation. My name is Denise Ketty, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. And before I introduce everyone, I want to go through a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Our webinar will run approximately 60 minutes, and we will have some time for Q&A at the conclusion of the webinar. Don't worry if you need to leave before the end of the webinar conclusion, because both Ethos and Merhab Robinson and Clarkson will post their webinar today or tomorrow on their YouTube channels. I will be adding the links to the slide presentation in the chat area for you to download during the presentation. If you have any questions or you can't download it, please message me in the chat. If you have questions during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A area on the dashboard at any time during the presentation. If you would like your question directed to a particular person, please note that when you are sending in the question. Just as a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and all the accompanying materials are protected by copyright. Our presentation today is intended for information purposes only and should not be relied on in reaching a conclusion in any area of law. The information is offered during the webinar is good as of today, June 6th, 2024. As always, we recommend that you consult your own legal counsel to address your specific situation to ensure that you have the most current information on legal matters. Our webinar today has been approved for HRCI credit, and I'm waiting for the...
Sorry about that.
Waiting for the catch up. We did mention the internet gods today, so
yes.
We just hope they will cooperate. Our webinar today has been approved for an HRCI credit. If you want a credit for your attendance, you will need to complete the follow-up survey when you receive the link. And can I put the link in the
Sure.
chat? Okay, so I'll drop the link in the chat during the session today, also towards the end of the session.
It will also be in the follow-up email that's sent out to it, because we'd like everyone to answer the survey, actually provide us with feedback, but you must do it if you want the HRCI credit.
Perfect. So if there's any questions, again, you can stick a note in the chat and I'll get back to you. I'm going to introduce you today to our expert presenters. Thank you. And welcome to the team, Luna Hernandez.
Whoop,
Luna
whoop.
is going to be joining us for our webinars. We're really happy to have her. She is, excuse me, she's an associate attorney at the law firm of Merhab Robinson and Clarkson Law Corporation in the firm's transactional department, where she advises clients on real estate, finance, M&A, and of course, employment law, which is why we have her here today. Luna loves the law so much that she studied in her native South Africa law, which you'll notice when she gets on, you'll see her beautiful accent. She worked as a paralegal after immigrating to the United States, and she loved law so much that she continued her studies at USC and was admitted to the state bar last year. Welcome, Luna. We're really happy to have you join the team. Oh, I forgot to mention in her spare time, you may find her cycling through Orange County, so you'll have to keep a lookout for her. Next, our human capital expert is Linda Duffy, president of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Linda has over 30 years of experience and has built her business and her team to deliver outstanding consulting, recruiting, training, and payroll support programs, along with organizational development programs. Linda and her team are known for building the magic of human connection with your company by developing strategies for business leaders to get the right systems, people, and culture in place so that you as a business owner can focus on running your building. And in Linda's spare time, you can find her still cheering on her beloved Angels, who actually won a game last night. So that's a good day. So it's a good
Swept
day.
the Padres, not
Yes.
just won a game, swept the Padres.
Yeah. So thank you for, thank you, ladies. Can you get us started this morning, Linda?
I will. Thank you so much, Denise, and welcome everybody. I'm happy to have you here. My computer seems to be acting up today, so bear with us as we go a little slow here through things. So today's agenda is all about the Workplace Violence Protection Plan. I'm glad you're here because obviously we only have another 3.5 weeks to become compliant with this law. That's a new law to California. It was passed last year. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on why they did this. We're going to go through some definitions, who's actually covered by this law, who's not, and then go through some plan requirements and some penalties. And as always, we save time at the end and hopefully can answer your questions. So as far as background goes, you know, we've all seen it in the news, right? Workplace violence, just violence in general, has continued to increase over the last several years. So these are some statistics that are available in different places through Cal-OSHA, FedOSHA, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. All of them come out with different statistics. So for example, in 2021, there were 57 people who actually died in workplace violence in the state of California. And nationally in 2020, there were 392 workplace violence deaths. Another statistic that's not on here is that nationally there were over 37,000 non-fatal workplace injuries resulting from what they call intentional violence, meaning somebody did something to somebody else intentionally, not just an oops, I didn't mean to hit you or something like that. That's roughly 143 a day. All right, so it is the second leading cause of fatal workplace injuries. So for all of those reasons, as you can imagine, not just California, but other states will be putting these type of things in place to help stem that tide, hopefully. The other thing is we've seen this trend over the last few years headed in this direction. If you think about the different policies you're required to have in your handbook, the different types of leaves you're required to offer employees, right? We have those already, like your standards of conduct, all of those thou shall not, don't bring a gun to work, don't, have any sort of violent altercations at work, no fighting, all of those type of standards of conduct. There's been additional rules around anti-violence, making sure employees have access to their phones in the case of some kind of workplace emergency. You have your regular safety and security rules that you have. And then you have leaves of absence that were designed specifically to protect people. Not obviously, this is not proactive, but after the fact. So, if somebody's injured, they might be entitled to take time off under FMLA or CFRA. And then we have the victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and other crimes leave, and then victims of a violent or serious felony leave. So all of those things have been sort of trending in this direction, but now they've put it all in place with this workplace violence protection plan. So, and hopefully you're also taking other steps, to head off any sort of workplace violence, like background checks, reference checks, those type of things as well. So the Workplace Violence Protection Plan is actually, it was started as Senate Bill 553. It has since been codified in the California Labor Code in section 6401.9. So if you want some good nighttime reading, by all means, look that up and you can go through the actual statute. That's where I always go because the devil's in the details on these things, right? So it does have a definition of workplace violence, and it says any act of violence or threat of violence that occurs in a place of employment. There's actually a little bit more detail on that because it can be the threat or use of physical force against an employee that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, psychological trauma, or stress, regardless of whether the employee sustains an injury. So even just the threat of the use of physical force would fall under this definition. And then also any incident involving a threat or use of a firearm or other dangerous weapon, including the use of common objects as weapons, regardless of whether the employee sustains an injury. So there's a lot more to it than you may think just on the surface. So they actually lay out 4 types of workplace violence. And I have to say, like with my team, I've been joking, like, do I really care who shows up with a gun? No, I don't, right? I'm going to take the same action regardless, but there's 4 types of workplace violence that they break this down. So the first one is committed by a person who has no legitimate business at the work site, right? It includes violent acts by anyone who enters the workplace or approaches workers with the intent to commit a crime. Okay, so they don't have any reason for being there. So it's like, you know, Joe Public wanders in off the streets, right? Number two is workplace violence conducted by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, or visitors, right? So presumably they do have a legitimate business reason for being there, but it's a third party. It's not your workers, right? Type 3 means a workplace violence against an employee by a present or former employee, supervisor, or manager. And then the fourth one is committed by a person who doesn't work there, but has or is known to have had a personal relationship with the employee. So think ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, you know, ex-wife, current wife, whatever, something like that. But somebody that's not associated with the company, but associated with that employee is coming on site. Now, what's interesting to me is they specifically mention that workplace violence does not include lawful acts of self-defense or defense of others. Okay, so that's important to know, because if you do have an incident, you know, you want your employees to be able to defend themselves, but also it's not going to necessarily trigger all of the other requirements that would be triggered under this plan. All right, so did I skip a slide there? Hold on. Nope, sorry. Okay. Just didn't turn my sheets. Bear with me. All right. So covered employers. This is going to be the question most of you probably have if you haven't asked already. These are the questions we're getting every single day. So this doesn't apply to all employers. It applies to most employers. So some of the exceptions are if you're a healthcare facility that's covered under this section 3342 of Title 8, which is simply they have their own requirements, right? So they already have their plan in place. Hopefully they're already required to have certain workplace violence protection plans in place, so they're exempted from this. Then it says facilities operated by the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So basically the prisons, I'm guessing they have their own system as well, as do law enforcement agencies, which is the third exception. Now, the last two are probably the ones that are going to be of most interest to everybody on this call. So the first one is employees teleworking from a location of the employee's choice, and it's not under the employer's control. So for those of you that all of your employees are remote, like for example, at Ethos, we're all remote. Everybody works out of their house because we're usually on site with an employer. We can do our work anywhere. We don't have a company building per se. So I would say that we are exempted under this particular rule. And then look at the bottom one. This one is the one that's most confusing. So it says places of employment where there are fewer than 10 employees, right, at any given time, which is key language, right, and that are not accessible to the public, which is the next part. And then the last part is if in compliance with section 3203 of Title 8. So let's break that down a little bit. So the first part is fewer than 10 employees, okay? They do say at any given time. So presumably you could have 8 employees at that location, but then you could have 15 employees because everybody's there working for a day, something like that. That would trigger the requirement, in our opinion, right? Not accessible to the public. We do not know what this definition is yet. So here's the story I will tell all of you. So earlier this week, in preparation for this, I actually called Cal OSHA and I talked to one of their consultants there and I said, what does not accessible to the public mean? And he essentially said, they don't have a definition yet. And that's because what he said to me is, we don't enforce laws, we enforce regulations. We don't have the regulations. Not only do they not have the regulations, right? The actual law says that they will propose regulations by the end of 2025, and they have to adopt them by the end of 2026. So even though they plan to start enforcing this at the beginning of the month, right, we're flying blind to a certain extent. Now, the last part is what he told me is you have to be in compliance with section 3203 of Title 8. That one has to do with the requirements for injury and illness prevention plans. So everybody's required to have an IIPP. Hopefully you have that. What I would suggest you do if you have fewer than 10 employees and you're not accessible to the public is just make sure that you review your IIPP to make sure that it's addressing any potential workplace violence. Okay, because what he's saying is if there is an issue or they come in for other reasons to inspect your location, they are going to inspect you right now under Section 3203, not under the Workplace Violence Protection Plan as codified in Labor Code Section 6401.9. I hope that makes sense because I know it's a little bit confusing, but if you have greater than 10 employees, unless they're all remote, you're going to have a plan. If you are not accessible to the public and you have fewer than 10 employees, and again, we don't know what that definition is yet, then you could be exempted from this perhaps, right? But you do still want to make sure you have an IIPP. The other thing I was going to say is I tried to give different examples. I asked the question, what if, you know, like we have a small law firm client that asked us this question and we said, no, you have fewer than 10 employees. And then they said, yeah, but we have clients that come in. So I asked Cal OSHA, what happens if they put a lock on the door and they control entry? And he's like, I think it's still accessible to the public because you're having non-employees come on site. So I have a feeling that when all is said and done, they're going to take a very conservative approach on this. So I would just urge you to make sure that you're looking at your IIPP and making sure that it addresses workplace violence someplace. All right, let's keep going. So the requirements under this law are that you have to have a written plan, right? It's similar to the COVID prevention plan. There's a long list of things, and we're going to go through what has to be included in that. It has to be accessible to employees at all times, authorized employee representatives, and also Cal OSHA. So if anybody comes in and asks, essentially, and Luna will tell you later, you know, about making those type of things available. It has to be available in all work areas, and it also has to be specific to the hazards and corrective measures for each work area. So if you have multiple sites, you have obviously, like let's say your manufacturing company, you have different areas throughout the building, you're going to have an office environment, you know, maybe you have a machine shop and then you have a plating area and you have something else. You're going to have to evaluate those hazards in all of those different sections and make sure they're addressed in the plan. If you have multiple sites, you're going to have to make sure that you have a plan for each site. It could be that 80% of it's the same, but you're going to have to address the specific standards for each of those. And then they did say it can be a standalone document or you can incorporate it into your IIPP. The consultant that Cal OSHA spoke to suggested strongly that it should be a separate document, but I'm going to leave that decision to you. Okay, let's look at the content. So going through the content, the first part is just, you know, names, job titles, whoever's going to be responsible for the plan, along with their roles and responsibilities. So you might have one person that's responsible for doing the inspection, right? Another person that's responsible for doing the training, another person like has overall responsibility of the plan. You want to put all of those in there. Now it says names or job titles, but with everything, just like a handbook, we always recommend you don't use names because names can change, but you use the job titles because if somebody leaves, you won't have to change and update your plan. The second one is effective procedures to actively involve employees in developing and implementing the plan. And it says this throughout the plan document, actually, or the law rather. It says that they really want employees to be involved in this. So it might be similar to a safety committee or somebody like that, but you get them involved in actually, you know, looking at the hazards, correcting the hazards, developing, implementing the plan, maybe even get them involved in doing the training. But they want the employees involved in this. The third one is methods to coordinate the implementation with other employers. So this is an interesting one. So don't know how many of you maybe are in a high rise where, you know, like Luna's office, for example, 10th floor of a building, you know, their office is going to have to coordinate with the building itself because they don't have control over the lobby. They don't have control over the elevators. They don't have control over, you know, other things, right? So they would have to coordinate or at least get the hazard, you know, identification information from the building itself, or find out what's the building doing to control access, things like that. A temp agency is another one. If you, or we've had we talked this week amongst my employees, and we were thinking about our different clients. We have a client that sends inspectors out to the Port of Long Beach, right? This is where it gets more complex than just a simple office building, because they're going on site someplace else. How does my client do an inspection of the Port of Long Beach? They don't, right? They're going to have to coordinate with the Port of Long Beach, make sure that their employees are being trained on the hazards at the port, right? And that the port has, a workplace violence protection plan in place. The next one is effective procedures for accepting and responding to reports of workplace violence. And also prohibiting retaliation against anyone who makes a report, right? So it's similar to harassment prevention, something like that. If you have maybe a hotline or a third party where employees can call and report some sort of issue, you might be able to leverage that as well. But they do mention the anti-retaliation provisions throughout the law as well. So they're taking that very seriously. So you want to make sure that anyone does come forward and reports whatever form of workplace violence, that they are protected and that nobody's retaliating against them for coming forward. Next one is the effective procedures to ensure that everyone is going to comply with the plan, right? And then in a manner consistent of Section 3203. So it basically is going to include a system for, like recognizing employees who follow safe and healthful work practices, training and retraining programs, disciplinary action if they don't, anything that you can do just to make sure people are complying with this. So it can be a carrot or a stick, but making sure that people are going to comply with the plan. They don't want you just writing a plan and throwing it in a binder or drawer and never looking at it again. And then lastly, on my part of the list, before I turn it over to Luna, effective procedures to communicate this plan, right, regarding workplace violence. So how does an employee report an incident, right, a threat or a concern, because they should be reporting all of those? And then how is the company going to investigate those reports and follow up with the employee to make sure they're informed of the results? With that, I'm going to say, welcome, Luna. We're so happy you're here. And I'm going to turn it over to you to continue with the content.
That sounds great. Thanks, Linda, and thanks for introducing me earlier, Denise. I'm really happy to be part of this team and looking forward to doing several of these over the coming months. So the next here is developing effective procedures to respond to actual or perceived workplace violence emergencies. What that really means is we're looking at identifying effective means to alert employees of the presence, location, and nature of workplace violence emergencies. We're looking for evacuation or sheltering plans that are appropriate and feasible for the work site. So honing in here, appropriate and feasible for the work site. This just shows how specific this needs to be to your particular location. And if you have various sites, to every single site location. It also includes how to obtain help from staff, such as security personnel assigned to respond to the workplace violence emergencies, and then also any means of contacting law enforcement. The next point is we're looking for procedures to develop and provide the required training, which we'll speak about in a coming slide in a bit more depth, and then procedures to identify and evaluate workplace violence hazards. And this is where you're really going to utilize the employees at your place of work to assist you in identifying these workplace hazards. What I will say here is we also need to include under that point the scheduled periodic inspections that identify these unsafe conditions and employee reports and concerns. The inspections must be conducted when the plan is first established, after each workplace violence incident, and then whenever the employer learns of a new or previously unrecognized hazard. So this inspection process is continual, and you're going to need to keep on top of this. We can turn over to the next slide. Okay, continuing, the procedures for post-incident response and investigation. So Something's happened. What are you going to do about it afterwards? We need to make sure that this is all in our plan. Then the procedures to review the effectiveness of the plan and revise it as needed. So this is not just a plan that we're wanting to put on our shelves and never look at again. It needs to be current, robust, and really speak to what is happening in reality. And then lastly, with regards to the content of the plan, we're looking at the procedures or other information required by the Division and Standards Board as being necessary and appropriate to protect the health and safety of employees. So what this last point is, it's really just giving the division broad scope in determining whether there would be any other information that needed to go into that plan. As part of this plan, you need what they call a violent incident log. And this particular log has, the statute states exactly what you need to state in this log. And you can have a look at the slide there, but it's the date, time, and location of the incident, the type of workplace violence. And when we're saying type, we revert back to those 4 types that Linda had discussed right in the beginning. They are statutorily defined as type 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you're going to identify in your log which type that falls under. You're going to then have to place a detailed description of what has happened. What is the incident that has occurred that we need to respond to? The classification of the perpetrator. And this isn't the person's name. This is really, was this a spouse? Was this just a random member of the public, a client of yours? How are we classifying this person? The circumstances that surrounded the incident. So was it late at night, early in the morning? Was the person alone? Middle of the day? We really want to keep all of that info in the log. Where the incident occurred, the type of incident. Was it a threat of violence? Was it actual violence? Did someone bring a gun? And then the consequence of that incident. Did everyone leave the premises and everything worked out fine? Has there been an actual injury? Were the police called? And then lastly, info about the person completing the log. When I say info about the person completing the log, that is fine to have the individual information, but I do want to call out that with regards to any other information on the log, personal identifying information that alone or in combination with other publicly available information that would reveal the identity of the person involved in the violent incident must be omitted from the log. So this includes the person's name, address, email address, telephone number, social security number, or any other information, whether alone or in conjunction with other information that you can discover who this person is. And the log must also be reviewed during any periodic reviews of the Workplace Violence Protection Program. Okay, training. So a question that we get quite often is, well, must I really go ahead and develop this training program? And the answer is absolutely yes. The training must include the employer's plan, and that is going through the plan in detail so that your employees really understand the substantive nature of this plan. You'll need to go over the definitions and requirements sections with them. Very importantly, clear procedures on how to report any workplace violence incidents. That's who to report to, who to call, telephone numbers posted in areas where everyone has them accessible. And then workplace hazards, corrective measures implemented, strategies to avoid harm. So these are really making clear to your employees what are the items or the circumstances in which you need to be on high alert to identify a hazard. What type of measures we're going to take if these happen, and the plans that we've put in place in order to avoid any particular harm. Then the violent incident log and how to obtain records is something that will have to be covered in the training. And this falls under the record keeping requirement. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it does fall under the record keeping requirement, and I'll speak about record keeping on the next slide. But it is important to know that your employees, as well as CalOSHA, they can request copies of these, and you need to make sure that you're able to give them to them. This particular training, something that we need to be clear on is that it has to provide an opportunity for interactive questions and answers. And what this really means is we're going to have to look at the way that we structure this training to make sure that, we aren't just putting a video on a screen for someone to sit at in their office and they'll never be able to ask questions about it. We want it to be interactive. And this may necessitate at this time, this sort of not one-on-one, but rather face-to-face or perhaps Zoom training. And I think that Linda is going to speak to what sort of training opportunities they have on offer. So we can go to the next one. Okay, you need to keep records not only of your particular plan, but then also of the training records and the violent incident logs. There are various time periods that are assigned to this. So firstly, you need to keep records of any workplace violence identification and correction for at least 5 years. And then your training records must be kept for 1 year. Any violent incident logs must also be kept for 5 years. And then records of workplace violence incident investigations must also be kept for 5 years. And so basically you can see, barring your training records, which you only need to keep for 1 year, you need to keep all of these records for 5 years. And at any point during those 5 years, either OSHA or your employees can make requests for those. And I think that the last slide that I'm speaking to before handing it over to Linda is the fun one that always makes people very nervous, and that is the penalties, and they are hefty. So you don't comply, what is going to happen to you? Well, OSHA can issue a citation, and this citation that they issue, it could include civil penalties, and they'll be up to the maximum amounts allowed. And just a note here, these maximum amounts, these are adjusted for inflation each year. So what you're looking at right now may change as of January 1st. However, as of the date of implementation of this particular plan, July 1st, 2024, you're looking at approximately $15,000 for general and regulatory violations. And this includes posting and record keeping violations. So you don't keep your log, you could be in for $15,000. If you willfully or repeatedly violate this particular statute, you are looking at a maximum cap of nearly $160,000 with a minimum penalty of $11,337 set. So that's willful and repeat. And then for serious violations, and we'd need to look to the statute to see what constitutes a serious violation, but it's somewhere in between that regulatory violation and willful and repeated, you're looking at a $25,000 maximum cap there. So as you can see, what appears to be a lot of work to put this plan together, it's going to pale in comparison to what you're going to pay if you get a citation. So we're advising people take this very seriously, default to comply. And yeah, with that, I am going to hand it back to Linda.
Thanks so much. Great job, Luna. We're glad that you're here. Okay, so we've been getting phone calls, for the last couple of weeks asking us if we're doing this. Yes, we're providing this as a benefit. We've got 4 different levels of pricing, so I'm going to share those with you. Obviously it's in the slides, so if you download the slides, you'll have that, and you can just reach out to me, and I'll connect you with one of our consultants who'd be happy to write this plan for you. So at the base level, the silver plan, if all you want is like, just give me the written materials, I'll do it. I'll do everything ourselves. We'll fill in the blanks on the template. We'll maintain the log, we'll, use your training materials, that type of thing, then we have that for you. If you want to step it up and you want us to come out and actually do the hazard inspection for you and then write the plan, we won't do the on-site training, but we'll give you the training materials. That's that next level up. And then 2 more levels for you. So the platinum level is really customizing everything with you and doing the inspection and training for one location. The pricing will go up if it's multiple locations. We also have to draw a distinction between the high hazard industries and the low hazard industries, because obviously if you're in construction, if you have a manufacturing environment, the hazards are going to be a lot greater than if you're in a law office. Right. So that's the difference there. And then finally, for some of you, you're going to be like, what? I didn't know I needed an IIPP or a COVID prevention plan or this workplace violence protection plan. So if you want, we will do all of those for you, including the inspection and the training for one location. So all you have to do is just reach out. We'll get on the calendar and we will work with you to get that in place as quickly as possible. So Denise, let's go back. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing. We were talking, let's see, let me go back because I made a note of it. So when Luna was talking about, on the log, and you have to put in the different types of incidents and things like that, was it a physical attack or a threat or whatever? The one thing that's interesting to me, and this is in the FAQs on the website, they're pretty much meaningless, but this is the one thing that jumped out at me. Animal attacks are covered under this plan. So think about all of you that bring your dogs to work, right? If your dog bites somebody that comes in, does something to attack somebody in the office, or someone comes into your office, that is going to trigger all of these requirements. So I'm not saying don't bring your dogs to work, but I am saying give that some thought and know that that's part of the plan. Now, Denise, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, that's a new little twist I didn't think about.
Yeah.
Okay, we do have a lot of questions. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A section and we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't answer them, you can always reach out directly to Luna and directly to Linda. I'm going to go back to one of the beginnings where you were talking about the requirements. And we have a person who wrote in and said they have a church with 9 employees located in Costa Mesa. So there's 9 employees, but it's a church. So we know that's open to the public. So what's your recommendation?
They're not exempted. It says really specifically, if you have fewer than 10 employees, you have to be not accessible to the public. And I would argue that a church is accessible to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the construction site? So you just mentioned there was a construction site. Do you need a document for each construction site you go to?
You have to do the hazard inspection at each location, and the plan has to be specific to that location. So what is interesting, and this is what we don't know yet, right? We're going to have to sort of wing this until we get the regulations, is let's say you're sending your employees out because you work in construction and they're going out to all these different sites. You may be a subcontractor and don't have control, right? So we don't know how this is going to work, other than my advice is to coordinate with whoever sort of owns that site, if you will, and make sure you're coordinating with them to get the employees, the training required, knowledge concerning any sort of hazards. But you are going to have a plan specific to each site. And it could just be an addendum for that site. Like, again, who's responsible for the plan, the log's going to be the same, like all of those different things. There's probably 80% of the plan that's going to be the same regardless. But if they're going out on different sites and they have different potential hazards, then you're going to have to make note of it and make sure the employees are aware of it.
I'm going to give you this one question, and we have questions about the log, so we'll get into that in a second. So this is maybe a little bit of a pivot, but if an employer shares a parking structure or a parking lot with another employer, should they collaborate on their WPPs here?
I would think so. Again, we're flying a little bit blind because we don't know, how this is going to be interpreted when it finally becomes CalOSHA regs. But it says in the law, it says that you have to make your plan and log available. If it's a multi-site employer, you have to make sure that all of those things that happen go to sort of like corporate, if you will. And it also says that, like I mentioned, the temp or going out on other sites, you're going to have to coordinate with those. Parking lot, I mean, yes, I would guess so, because the risk is the same. So again, if it's the building ownership, talk to them maybe, see what they're doing. Like I'll go back to Luna's office, right? Because I'm familiar with it. They've got a parking structure. Well, if Luna's walking out to her car at 10 o'clock at night by herself, right? That's a potential workplace violence hazard. And there has to be something done to address that. It could be lighting, it could be a buddy system, it could be security, it could be a whole bunch of other things. But she's not going to personally have control over it, nor is Marla, her boss, right? So they would have to talk to the building to say, hey, this is a potential hazard. What are you going to do about it?
Okay. Let's
Luna,
turn to
Luna, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, well, just to say that one of the places that you need to record in the log is the venue, and that actually specifies whether that's happening in the parking structure. So I would say just default to make sure that you are working with the management company of that parking structure.
So perfect segue, Luna, because it talks about logs, and we want to talk to you a little bit about the logs. So you were talking about the logs and emitting personal information, but we want to make sure who is the person, how do we report the info in the logs without putting the personal information in? So could you just go through whose information has to be put in and what is allowed in the log again?
Right. So it's information about the person completing the log. You can put their personal information in at this stage, in my interpretation of the statute. However, it is any information that would identify the people involved in the violent incident. So that could be both the victim and the perpetrator. You're going to want to make sure you're not putting their first name, their last name, their address, their telephone number, their email address, anything that would allow someone when they're reading the log to say, wait a minute, I know who this was. You aren't allowed to put that information in there, and it specifically specifies that it has to be left out. And not only does it have to be left out from the log, you have to make sure that you aren't putting in any personal information into the log that when utilized in conjunction with other secondary sources, you would be able to make that connection. So just trying to think of an example there. If I just put some sort of email address, let's say, I don't identify the person, but I just put a random email address, but I know that if I Google that email address, it's going to direct me for some reason straight to a person. You want to make sure that there's no ability to connect those dots.
Okay. Does speaking of the log, does the information from the log need to be reported to the government on an annual basis? I know there's other things that we have to report annually.
Not to my knowledge. You just have to make sure you're keeping the log for the required amount of time, which is 5 years, I believe. And then it is subject to inspection. So you need to be able to produce it.
I also believe that you have to share, like, let's say I'm an employer and I have 5 different locations. Each location would have to report it to like the head location, for lack of a better distinction, right? So sort of like I think of it as affirmative action plans. Each location has their own plan, but it all gets rolled up into one big plan, right? And I think that's sort of the same thing. Also, like going back to our example, if something happens in Luna's office to one of their employees, well, let's make it on somebody on a different floor, Luna, floor 9, somebody in floor 9 has some sort of issue, right? That log has to be provided to the, in this case, I don't know, building management company or something like that, but it's possible they have to provide it to somebody else in that manner. But they don't have to send it to any place. It's not like the COVID prevention where we had to report incidents. Denise?
Yes. Okay.
I'm like, did she freeze?
Okay, so what is the difference between a violent incident log and an incident investigation?
Do you want to take that, Linda, or would you like me to?
Go for it.
So the log itself is just recording what has happened. The investigation is the actual process of determining what happened. So if you're conducting an investigation, you're interviewing people, perhaps you're taking statements if needed. You're really getting into the weeds of what has happened here. The log is just a memorialization of that investigation.
Okay.
I would compare it to, you know, the OSHA 300 log, right? Somebody gets hurt on the job, you're going to record it on the OSHA 300 log, but at the same time, you have some sort of investigation that you're going to do internally to correct that hazard, right? Prevent that injury or illness from happening again. And so you're going to go through that process, but the log itself is just, like she said, memorializing what happened.
Okay. I'm going to pivot because we have a couple of questions on training right now. So, is there a deadline to train new hires?
It does not specify.
Okay. If we have employees that Spanish is their native language or primary language, do we need to do the training in Spanish?
Yes, I would. And I would think about having any other documentations, any written materials also put in Spanish. I was going to try to find real quickly the language requirement. Give me 1 second. So I have it highlighted on a page, but it essentially says that you have to do anything according to, okay, here it says training must be provided in content and vocabulary to the educational level, literacy, and language of employees. Right? So they want to make sure that, you know, you talk to them in a way they're going to understand in all aspects, including, you know, if they're primarily Spanish, which we have a lot. And by the way, half of our team is bilingual Spanish, so we can cover all of this in Spanish as well. We do it all the time. But we would have to do the training in Spanish. And if there's handouts or maybe even the written plan needs to be translated into Spanish.
And do we have specifics of the type of training? Is it a handout? What do we have to tell people on training?
Yeah, so, you know, she went through the requirements on the one slide. So download the slides and go back over them. But generally speaking, they want it to be effective, thorough training to make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent workplace violence from happening. There's requirements in terms of what has to be included. It's very specific that you're not going to get away with like recording something and having people watch a recording or handing them something and letting them just read through it. It has to be interactive. They want people to be able to ask questions and get those answers from the person most knowledgeable about the plan, in air quotes. Do you want to add anything to that, Luna?
No, I just agree 100% with you. You're not going to get away with just putting someone in front of a computer screen here. There has to be the ability for it to be interactive.
Okay. And does all the training need to be completed by July 1?
Don't know. Presumably so. Probably not going to happen. But, you know, again, so much of this we're just winging because the statute is not clear. Right. But it is clear that you have to do training annually. You have to do it when you roll out the plan. And that's why I say it has to be done then, because the plan needs to be in place by July 1. So it's saying, you know, you've got to do it when you roll out the plan, first establish it, annually thereafter. If there's a new hazard, if there's an incident, there's all sorts of other things that trigger sort of retraining, if you will.
Okay. And do you put this in like how you would for like sexual harassment? Do you put this in an employee's file that they completed this training?
You definitely want some sort of record that the training was completed. However you want to, you know, keep those. I think Luna wanted to add something though.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in the absence of the regulations and, you know, not really knowing a lot of the definitions of what we're going to place on things, if you can at least, I would say, show a good faith effort at this stage of compliance, hopefully that will be enough to put CalOSHA's minds at rest if they are to inspect you before such time that all of these regulations come out. So if you, by all means, if you are able to do that training by July 1st, I would say go for it, get it done. However, if there's just no way that's happening, just make sure that you're showing a good faith effort to get this underway and train your employees as soon as possible.
Luna, would you recommend that they sign an acknowledgement, employees sign an acknowledgement that they've been trained on this?
I don't see any problem with that. Yeah.
I don't see any way around that. Like I would definitely have records, somebody acknowledging they received the training, give them a copy of a certificate, whatever you want to do if you want to make it fancy. But yes, you need to have some sort of record that they were trained.
Okay. Let me go back. We have quite a lot of questions, so I'm trying to scroll through as many as I can right now. I'm a subcontractor and my crews are on multiple job sites each week, and they rarely exceed 8 employees on a particular site. All the projects are done on private property and the public is not allowed. Does the Workplace Violence Protection Program requirement still apply to me?
Great question. Don't know.
Yeah.
What I would say is this, like, because these are the examples I gave. I'll tell you the 2 examples I gave and the answer this consultant gave me. He said in both cases, yes, you need to be compliant. I don't necessarily agree with that, but again, I'm not the one doing your inspection, right? So we have a small law firm. They've got 3 employees. I said, what if they put a lock on the door and they regulate, the ability to come in, right? So they only allow their clients to come in, as they knock, they verify, oh, it's my client Luna, and then I let her in the building. Is that accessible to the public? He said yes. Okay. So then I said, okay, we've got a nonprofit that runs a homeless shelter for women. I said, it's not open to the public. No one can wander in, but they bring volunteers in, right, to help out. They have fewer than 10 employees, but they have volunteers. So they may go over the 10, but let's say they even stayed under the 10. Are those clients that live there, right, the women living there, are they considered the public? Because you can't just wander in off the street, right? And he was like, oh no, you have to have a plan. So I think his answer would have been anything, right? Like, I'm on the moon, you have to have a plan. Like, it doesn't really matter. Having said that, what I would say in this example, 1 of 2 things. Either if you have, think about how you've handled the injury illness prevention plans before, right? And do whatever you did that way, because that's how they're going to inspect for right now. So if you are required to have an IIPP for each of those job sites, then you need to probably have a workplace violence protection plan for each of those job sites. I understand the argument that that's not open to the public, but I don't think they're going to see it that way. And even if they do, remember what I said before, you're not completely exempted. They're just going to inspect that incident under the IIPP. So you want to make sure that you have that for each of those locations at the very least. The second thing I would say is call Cal OSHA directly. You can look up their number. They have a consultation division. Feel free to reach out to them. They got back to me literally within an hour of the time that I called and left a message and I sent an email. So they try to be helpful. They're just running blind right now like we are because they don't have regulations to enforce. So their backfall for the time being, for the next 2.5 years, right, unless they get adopted sooner, is going to be to enforce this under the IIPP.
Okay. So I just want to clarify something because I was trying to read the questions. So you were mentioning, so what if we're not technically open to the public, but we have delivery people come in or marketing reps come in
Right.
or something like that. So like I come to your meetings at your place, or maybe I go into
Right.
another client's location.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Again, your guess is as good as ours. According to what he told me, he considers all of that open to or accessible to the public.
Okay. I know we're at 11:55 and we're trying to get to as many questions as possible. We have a couple of questions on PEOs and I'm trying to consolidate them real quick. If an employer is using a PEO, who is responsible for it? Is the PEO the master employer or the employer hiring their employees through the PEO? So who would be responsible, I guess, for the training at that point?
I don't know legally who's responsible, but I'm assuming that it's a joint employer relationship and that both are responsible. But at the end of the day, you as the employer, even though I know you're going to say, oh, but really they're, a TriNet employee or whatever, you still have responsible for them because you control their actions on a daily basis. I'm going to assume that you are going to be the ones tagged, but I don't know for sure. I would just make sure that you coordinate with TriNet or, Administraff, whoever, you know what I mean? Like Insperity, whoever you're using as a PEO, and make sure that ask them what they're going to do to support you guys on this.
Okay. What if you have employees that live and work in the same place? Do these laws only apply during work hours? That's a new one.
Yeah, I don't know. It does make reference to employer provided housing. I didn't pay a lot of attention to that because we don't have that triggered very often, but there is a reference to employer provided housing, but there's nothing in the statute that says anything about, it says at all times. Periodically, it'll say at all times. So I'm gonna, I don't know, guess, Luna, and say that it would, be after hours as well. What do you think, Luna?
Yeah, I'm thinking you will likely need to comply. I'm thinking of a situation where it's not quite remote, but you're working from home. But let's say you have more than 10 people coming to your home where people are working from. I would say you need to comply at that point. But the answer is I actually don't know. This is going to have to be examined on a case-by-case basis. And until such time that we have better guidance from CalOSHA, I would say default to comply.
Okay. I had a question here. I'm going to try to scroll back up to it about here it is. Someone has a janitorial company. Can we email or send the training to all the employees? Or do we have to do it in person for all? Like I know they
Yeah.
have to do sexual harassment training and stuff like that, but what about this?
Yeah, what I would do in those circumstances, we have a couple of janitorial cleaning clients, and so we've been talking about all of these scenarios, right? They, first of all, janitorial cleaning companies have an additional requirement in terms of harassment prevention training. It could be that you could combine it when you do that training, take a little bit of extra time to do this training, right? You could also, if you wanted to, because it doesn't say how long the training has to be, it doesn't say anything, it has to be effective is all it says. Maybe everybody can, log into a Zoom or something on their phone, right? So you don't have to have everybody come to one location, but you could do it via webinar, essentially, like we're doing it here. As long as they have the ability to ask questions and get them answered, I think you're compliant.
Okay. And maybe Luna, you want to take this one. Do you recommend that they designate a committee or committee members to oversee this program internally within a company? And if so, who would you recommend be included?
Absolutely. If you have enough employees that it makes sense to put a committee together to deal with this, definitely do that. You want someone who's really knowledgeable about the work site and can interact with the other employees and solicit feedback and really drive that process. You definitely want both people in positions of power as well as people on the ground, I would say. There really needs to be this combined effort at developing this plan. So yeah, take a look at your workforce and try and identify who those people may be. And perhaps effective communicators are great people to put on that committee, as they'll likely be able to connect the dots between management and just a general employee.
And if you have a safety committee, they could do both jobs essentially, right? Because they're used to probably looking for hazards in the workplace, raising concerns, having employees come to them and report concerns, things like that. So if you have a safety committee, I would just probably ask them to take this on. Or if you don't have one, form one now, right? But to Luna's point, you want a cross section of them of employees, both management and non-management, to be on the committee. And that's really clear in the statute.
We have one last question, then something we didn't hit. Well, we have a lot of questions, but so we'll download and we'll get back to. And if we didn't answer your questions today, we're sorry, but we're running out of time. And everyone is booked this afternoon. So you have Linda's email address and Luna's email address. So you please reach out to them. But the last question I want to do, because we didn't circle back to it, is animal attacks. Since you brought up the dogs in the office, a lot of people bring dogs to the office. Does it include wild animals too? So, depending on where your office is located.
It could be, right? So you work for the city of Irvine in the, conservation department, you have to go hiking out into the hills or whatever it is. Yeah, for sure. That's a potential workplace hazard, right? So I'm sure like in that example, they've already thought about this and addressed it, but it might be, they need to carry some sort of spray or they need to have some sort of protection with them or, you know, whatever, and a method to call for help, certainly. But yeah, I'm sure it would. It says animal attacks. It doesn't say dog attacks. It just says animal attacks. So if you have bring your bird to work day as well, then, you know, address a bird attack.
Okay, I am just going to drop the link to the survey again in the webinar chat so that everybody has that. So if you need HRCI credits, as I mentioned, we have a lot of questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all the questions, but please reach out to Linda and Luna directly. And then is there any last words? Besides, we appreciate everyone coming to the webinar today. Obviously, this is a hot topic, so it's a
Obviously,
great
yes.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, in our office, like I said, we're going to be writing these plans for all of the clients. We have our templates developed. So we're ready to rock and roll on this. Luna's office is going to actually refer all of those to us. So if you have questions about the law, by all means, reach out to either one of us. If you're interested in having us work with you on that, then just reach out to me and we'll get something on the books. Thank you
Great.
again so much, Denise and Luna. Such
Thank
a
you so
pleasure to have
much.
you here. Everyone, please answer the survey and give us some ideas for future webinar topics as well.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Have
We
a great
appreciate it.
day.